I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting of the Operations and Governance Committee to order. The time is 8:33 a.m. And thank you to all of the public who is joining us today. We have some internal business to take care of before the governing board assembles. So appreciate your cooperation. First item on the agenda is the roll call to determine a quorum.
Mr. Aguilar,
Here.
Mr. Bass,
Here.
Ms. Gustafson. Here. Ms. Hill. Ms. Lane,
Here.
Mr. Rice. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
All right, thank you. For the members of the public who are joining us remotely to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov under the calendar header. Click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for January 22nd, 2025. There you'll find a link to the public webinar posted on Zoom. To address the committee members directly with your comments, for those of you on Zoom, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking Raise Hand at the bottom of your screen at the appropriate agenda item. With your hand raised, you will be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you use the dial-in numbers to join us by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. For those items that are agendized as information only, we will hear public comment during the general public comment period at the end of the meeting. Comments on items agendized for action or possible action, we will hear public comment before the committee takes any action. To our remote committee members, if you wish to speak, you can also raise your hand in Zoom. You'll find the hand icon on the bottom of your screen. Remote committee members may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations. Please, everyone, remember to mute your mic unless speaking to cut down on background noise. And finally, I would ask that all remote members turn on their cameras if they are able. To members of the public who have joined us in person, if you wish to speak at the appropriate time for public comment, you will be called upon in the front of the room. Committee members who are in person, just signal me if you have a comment to make. All right, let's go on to the next item, which is approval of the agenda. Is there any comments? And then a motion, please.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you. There's a motion. Good morning, Mr. Rice. That's okay. We're voting on the agenda. There's a motion to approve the agenda. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. That item is approved. We're now going on to item number 2, which is approval of the minutes. We have a draft set of minutes from November 20th on page 7 of your packet. Does any member of the committee wish to make a change? If not, I will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, sir. There's a motion. Is there any discussion? Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay, hearing none, then all those, oh, I'm sorry, we'll do a roll call vote.
Mr. Aguilar,
Yes.
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Ms. Hill, Ms. Gustafson. Yes. Mr. Rice
Yes.
and Ms. Lane.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move forward to discussion and possible recommendation for approval of the December financials. You can find this report starting on page 39 of your packet, and I'll pass this on to Mr. Cox.
Good morning. Thank you. Chad Cox, for the record, finance lead for TRPA. Jumping into it here, wanted to give a quick update on the state's budgeting process. We've had some good progress here in January. On the 10th, the California governor's budget was released, and TRPA's budget is whole as expected. We've also, within that budget, we've got a budget change proposal, or BCP, that's part of that for salary increases, which would be commensurate with what the state has done over the last couple of years. So that's good news. On the Nevada side, the Nevada governor posted a finance budget booklet. And also similarly, our appropriations are as expected. So the good news there is that we're working through the process. On just quickly through some highlights financially, revenues, and we'll just hit these real quick and then jump into some detail. The revenues are at 39% of budget. As you can see here, the chart on the right shows our planning fees. Our planning fees are on budget and ahead of prior years, both because of volume and then also through some of the rate adjustments that we did to cover inflation and our costs. From an expenditure perspective, we're at 34% of budget halfway through the year. Comps right as expected at 50%. And contracts are at 25% of budget, which are, and will align with grant implementation. So jumping over to the next slide, please. Digging into revenue at a more detailed level. Our state's appropriation are all received except for the salary increases from the state of Nevada, which will be going to the Board of Examiners in February. We put in a request to go and request those appropriations. So we received that last year. I don't see an issue with that. We just need to go through the process. We wanted to confirm the California BCP was kind of in the budget before we went back to the state, so we can use those for base increases versus one-time bonuses. So that should come up as soon as we go through that process in February. From a grants perspective, we're only at 3%. I do think we are a little bit behind here versus history. And I think it's an administrative item. Our finance team had some transition throughout the summer, and we finally got fully staffed in October. So the team's working real hard right now to get all that invoicing out to our funders to kind of catch us up. I think we are just a little bit behind there. Those do tend, based on my experience last year, those do ramp and build up at the very end, but I do think being only at 3%, we are a little bit behind. So hopefully in January, we'll get those out and you'll see that in the February presentation of the January financials. Fees for service, those are all in. Thanks to all the counties. Those were invoiced in October and we've received all those funds. So thank you to all 5 counties for providing those funds. And finally, I think the other bucket is probably an item of discussion. We're roughly halfway through the year. It only shows 30% invoiced or received to date. And that's because our LAIF account, where we have a lot of our funds with the state of California, those interest expenses or those interest incomes are only booked on a quarterly basis. So we'll see the full quarter bookings for that, which is where a lot of our funds are kept. So that should step up to 50% as expected. So I don't see an issue there, but that's why that looks behind as reported. Any questions?
Yeah, I do have a question. Can you explain to me the difference between state revenue and grants?
Yeah, so the state revenues are the 2 appropriations from state of California and Nevada in its compact 1/3, 2/3 share. The grant revenue is where we're doing grant implementation for programs like our aquatic invasive species program and things like that. So those may be federal funds. Sometimes they're state contributions for things like AIS, but if it's a program related to a grant, that goes through that line item. Does that make sense? Okay, thanks. Any other questions?
Other questions? No.
Great. Let's jump over to expenses real quick. From an expense perspective, like I said, on track from a comp perspective. Contracts are mainly general fund and grant contracts. The reason that is behind is those ramp as we implement with our grant programs. Financing is on track halfway through the year. We made we do 2 interest payments annually. The December payment was made, which is why we're roughly halfway through. And we'll have our next financing payment for the building in April. Finally, the other bucket is things like our property taxes, when folks have to travel and things like that. And that's well under budget. So we're looking good from an expense perspective. Are there any questions?
No? Thank you.
Great. Moving quickly to cash flow. For the month of December, our receipts were $900,000. Disbursements were $1,700,000, driven by our payroll, accounts payable, which resulted in a usage of cash. That's typically how, if you see the history are the dotted lines, the green is where we are today. Typically, the state appropriations come in at the beginning and we spend down throughout the year. So cumulatively, we still are at a positive 3.3 million of cash, which we will spend down through the remainder of the year. One thing I would say, there are still mitigation disbursements to come. We've approved $1.2 million as a committee throughout the year. We've only dispersed roughly 100,000, so there's still more mitigation to be dispersed as we go through the remainder of the fiscal year. Any questions on cash?
I don't see any. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes my report.
Excellent. Okay. Committee members, any additional questions before we go to the public? No? Okay. Seeing none, then we'll go ahead and open this up to public comment. Are there any members in the room that would like to comment on the financial report? Seeing none, are there any members online?
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised online to comment.
Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and close public comment and I'll bring this back to the committee for further discussion and or motion. Thank you. There's a motion. Any further discussion? Okay, may we please have a roll call vote?
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Mr. Bath, Mr. Aguilar.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Bath. Ms. Lane,
Yes.
motion passes.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to agenda item number 4. This is discussion and possible recommendation for approval of the fiscal year 2024 audited financial statements. Information on this item can be found starting on page 59. And I'll give this back to Mr. Cox.
All right, thank you. First, to kick off, I'll do a quick introduction, and then we'll have Mark Davis, who is our auditor, walk through the actual presentation. But first, I did want to take just a sec to appreciate and thank the team. This is a full team effort. You all probably know Kathy. Kathy Salisbury is our Director of Finance, and she's the lead on this particular aspect of our financials, which is the audit. Casey Davy on our team is a senior accountant. She's got a lot of input. She manages all of the payables, so a lot of the audit process associated with that she's engaged in. And then we've got our 3 grants analysts, Caroline Stutzman, Georgina Balkwell, and Julia Carlson, who's new to the team. They support for any of the grant related requests that the auditors have. So big thanks to the team. I think the audit, Mark will walk you through. I think it was, from my perspective, being new, very thorough. I think the team did a great job, and I think it's a good result. Mark will share a couple of findings, but overall, I feel good about the process. I do think there is opportunity in the future for us to short cycle this a little bit. I mean, literally, we finished the fiscal year in June, and it took us, 5 to 6 months of work to get through this. So one of our goals as a finance team is to shorten that cycle. So we'll be working on that in the upcoming year. But overall, I think it's a great process. And from an audit perspective, Davis Farr is who's been our auditor for some time. The team is very experienced in government audits. They've been our auditor for a while, which I think having a consistent view of things is important. I know in the corporate world, changing auditors may actually look poor, like there's a concern. So I think having their expertise over time has been a good thing. We will, as you can see here, we've done a competitive RFP in 2015, 2020. We're up for another RFP. So we are going to go through that process in the coming year. But overall, Davis Farr has been great to work with, and they are also TTD's auditor. So when you go and look through their financials, it's helpful that they understand the relationship between us and TTD. So with that being said, I wanted to introduce Mark. He's the named and managing partner for Davis Farr. And Mark, I'll hand it over to you to walk through the findings. And I think it's important to know that Mark Davis and the firm is an independent firm, and they work for you guys, not for the finance team. So feel free to ask questions either through the presentation or at the end. So thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Davis.
Thank you. Good morning, all. Thanks, Chad. We'll go ahead and get started on the presentation of the results of the audit this past year. Next slide. So we'll be talking a little bit about what was included in the scope, what your responsibilities are, what our responsibilities are as your external auditor, and then get into the results of the audit. Next slide. So this year, the scope did include the annual financial audit of TRPA as well as the annual financial audit of TSAC. It included a single audit of your federal expenditures the past year, as well as financial and compliance audit of the El Dorado County Local Transportation Fund, El Dorado County State Transit Assistance Fund, and the Placer County Local Transportation Fund. One change from prior years, in prior years there was financial compliance audit related to Proposition 1B funds, but those were fully expended in the prior fiscal year, so it's dropped off from the scope of the engagement. Next slide. From a responsibility standpoint, management is responsible for preparing those financial statements, including the notes to the financial statements. We do assist in the preparation of those statements, but it is management's responsibility. And so before statements are issued, they go through and they'll review all the statements and reconcile them back to their accounts and make sure that everything that is in fact that we assisted in preparing those statements is in fact match their accounting records. The statements need to be prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, and management is responsible for designing a system of internal control as it relates to financial reporting, and then also to ensure that those financial statements are free of material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error. And this is not a fraud audit. We don't go looking for fraud as part of this engagement. If there is something that does come out that seems irregular or that we have concern about, we would bring that up to information of either management or to you as the operations committee or the governing board, depending upon what level the suspected fraud would occur. We do send out a number of questionnaires throughout the organization to all levels of employees, asking if they are aware of any fraud or suspected fraud. And all of those conversations or all of those questionnaires came back with no indication of such. Next slide. Our responsibility as your external auditor is to express an opinion on those financial statements. And we do conduct our audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards as well as government auditing standards. And those standards require us to perform the audit to obtain reasonable but not absolute assurance that those financial statements are free from material misstatement. The procedures that we prepare in any given year are really based upon our judgment, and they're going to vary year over year. Many of the things may be the same, but based upon our risk assessment that we perform at the outset of the audit, we might design different procedures to be performed. Next slide. So we initially communicated with you back in October that the audit was ongoing. We split the audit into two phases. We began interim work in June of last year, and our interim work consisted really of looking at the internal controls and the risk associated with the 2024 exam audit, and then designing what our procedures were going to be. In October, we began the final portion of the audit where we actually do the deep dive into the numbers. And that literally ran all the way through, as Chad alluded to, that literally ran all the way through last week. So when final reports were issued. We did issue draft reports in December. And as I had mentioned earlier, management did go through and review those reports and provide feedback, made sure all the numbers tied to what they had. And then final reports are before you today. I do want to point out that an unmodified opinion was issued. That's a clean opinion, which is what you want. So that is good news. Next slide. In looking just at a 30,000-foot level at the government-wide statements year over year, your assets increased about 1.2 million. Your liabilities and deferred inflows decreased by just 71,000. And that resulted in your net position increasing by about 1.3 million. Revenues were up year over year, 929,000, and expenses were down year over year by 49,000. Included in the financial statements for both TRPA and TSAC at the front of the statements is a portion called Management's Discussion and Analysis. And that section in each of the financial statements explains in detail what these changes, what changes occurred during the year that really give rise to the slide that you're seeing here. Next slide. So getting to the results of the audit, first looking at TRPA, we had no audit adjustments that were proposed. We did have one internal control finding this year, and this is not a new finding, but you haven't seen it in a few years. It has to do with need to review outstanding deposits payable. Those deposits on the books at June 30, 2024 amounted to about 7.7 million. And of that 7.7 million, 3.1 million is greater than 5 years, and 542,000 is greater than 20 years old. Those really old deposits are accruing interest and continue to get bigger and bigger year over year. Over the years that we've been your auditors, this issue, as I mentioned, has come up in the past. And when we do bring it up and we talk to the board about it, things in the following subsequent years get better. There's lots of concerted effort to reduce those deposits payable, find either whether you refund them back to who made the deposit because the deposit's no longer needed, or you take it in as revenue because the activity's been completed and you're entitled to those funds. We do recommend that review happen again and maybe consult with legal counsel as to, especially for those really, really, really old deposits, some date back 40 years, that as to whether they truly need to be returned or whether you are able to take those into income.
Mr.
From
Davis,
a piece-
can you just pause here for one second?
Absolutely.
Just going to ask either Mr. Davis or Mr. Cox, could you explain this in layman's terms and not government speak? Because I'm not tracking.
Let me give it a shot and then Mark can jump in. So, as applicants come in and do a permitting process or a project, they'll provide a deposit. In a lot of cases, sometimes they will not complete a project, right? And so if a project isn't completed, what do you do with the deposit? And some of these deposits date back pre-TRPA. So there's some complexity around there about how do you go and contact the permittee? Are they even alive? And if they're not and you can't get a hold of them, what do you do with it? And so there does need to be a concerted effort with our compliance team, which they are, they do. We have a process and a plan to go through those. But yeah, the age deposits did go up, as Mark said, year on year. And I think that's partly why the finding.
Madam Chair.
Mark, go ahead, Julie. Yeah.
May I jump in? Thank you, Madam Chair. Julie Reagan, TRPA Executive Director. As Mark stated, this has come up in my tenure with the agency, and we have instituted teams to go back and research properties. Some of the securities we've held go back to the California TRPA, and there is a lot of legal, which preceded the formation of TRPA as a whole under the new compact. So there is some legal complexity. We are addressing this right away, though, and we've actually taken some rules of procedures changes to this board to address this because owners change, people do pass away. Some project applicants, for whatever reason, don't seek return of these funds, and so they sit there. So we either need to use them or give them back. And so we've actually tightened our procedures around that into security deposit, basically, for a project. So as Chad mentioned, we just hit in this last year, a threshold that we're looking at, and we're assigning a team to work on it because we don't want to hold these funds. We will need to get them back or reseat them in if they're legitimately abandoned.
Gotcha. That was very helpful. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Aguilar.
Can't you return those funds to the state treasurer for unclaimed property?
We've been told in California, on the California side, that there's state law that's required to do that. So we're, it's a complicated question, but we're looking at it.
And on the Nevada side?
They're different. It's a lower amount of money, but we did address the Nevada side, maybe I want to say about 10 or 15 years ago. And we did a big sweep and returned a big slug of those dollars.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Davis.
Okay, thank you. The next bullet for TSAC, there's a typo on the slide. It should not say Prop 1B since there are no funds. But for TSAC, there were no findings or audit adjustments that were proposed for this year. Next slide. From a single audit perspective, this is an audit of your federal expenditures. During the year into June 30, 2024, you had $5.9 million in federal expenditures. And there's a process by which the Single Audit Act identifies how we have to go about testing those federal expenditures and what we consider to be a major program. And this past year, there were two major programs that met those qualifications. The Fish and Wildlife Management Assistance Program, there was $2.5 million expended there, and the invasive species of where there was $1 million expended. We did have one compliance finding this year related to the invasive species program. There's a reporting requirement that there's two types of reports that get submitted or that need to be submitted under this program. One is a performance progress report, and the second one is a financial report. The performance, and they have different due dates. The performance progress report for the year ended June 30, 2023 was due by December 29th, and it was submitted on June 24th. So it was submitted late, and that's really what gave rise to the finding this year. I think that the really issue there is just an oversight in that the financial report was not due until June 30th, and so they were submitted about the same time, but one of them, it turned out to be late. Next slide. On the separate standalone TDA audits for El Dorado County and Placer County, there was one finding that appeared in each of the audits, and it's the exact same finding, and that is that TRPA needs to submit the audit of El Dorado County and Placer County to the California State Controller within 180 days after the end of the fiscal year. And the audits for June 30, 2023 were submitted a little bit late, about 25 days late. And so that's what gave rise to this one compliance finding.
Mr. Davis, if you'll just hold right here, Mr. Aguilar.
Yes. Can you explain to me why we do these audits? Or why they're related to TRPA?
TRPA is, as the Regional Transportation Planning Entity, is responsible for managing the local transportation fund and the state transit assistance funds for these two counties. The funds are actually held at the county level, and TRPA sends allocation instructions to both counties as to where to distribute the funds to recipient agencies. And so each of these counties has agencies that are recipients, TTD being the largest one. TART is a recipient, and then the counties themselves are a recipient, as is TRPA. But it's TRPA's responsibility for looking at the fund as a whole and doing an audit of the fund as a whole and submit that to the county. All those individual recipients, TTD, TART, and they have to submit audits of the way that they spend their funds that they're receiving from you. They have to submit those audits to you by a certain deadline as well, and then you turn around and submit those to the state. So it's actually a requirement in the California Code of Regulations that requires both the because you're managing the funds, to have these funds audited and submitted once a year.
And I'll just, go ahead, Ms. Reagan.
Madam Chair, thank you. Julie Reagan here. It's a great question, Secretary Aguilar, and it actually goes to your earlier question about the general fund versus grant funds. And it just highlights the complexity of our budget. We are a fiscal agent for the Science Council. We are the federal designated MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, and we have these responsibilities. And we have an incredible team that works with all the partners and often distributes monies to other, to other partner entities that are implementing transit, et cetera. But it's a good example of some of the complexities that we work with our budget. It's atypical of a typical public agency, because of the compact, we often have that role of convening that partnership and serving as a trusted fiscal agent. So appreciate the question.
No problem. And those funds are held at the local county level?
In terms of transit implementation, right? So it's Placer County for TART, Tahoe Transportation District for transit on the South Shore.
What kind of, if we're the fiscal responsibility, what kind of controls are on the use of those funds?
I will say in partnership with the TTD governing board. I mean, this board has a seat on the TTD board, and we do that in partnership with the TTD. And that's something that's a big conversation right now with the Tahoe Transportation Board about the formation of a joint powers authority, where those monies go. And it's an annual process that we go through. And there's a lot of coordination with the Federal Transit Authority in doing so.
And I believe this same problem came up last year. I actually looked into it on the El Dorado County side to find out that our deadline for providing the report to TRPA is after TRPA's deadline. So every year this is a problem. I think it's same for Placer County. But I don't know if we're ever going to be able to align that, because I believe it's state law
Yeah.
that's governing.
And I
our
think we can
deadline.
file for extension. I think for in this case, for this fiscal year, we're right in it now where we need to submit our financial statements to the California controller. And so we filed an extension because we're not complete and reviewed through you. So hopefully if we get the extension filed and we get it within the extension, then we will not have a finding
Okay.
next year. Yeah.
Good. That would
So I
be
think the
great.
miss in the past might have been doing the extension. Yeah, but I'm with you. The dates don't align, so you got to
Right.
follow the backup plan.
Okay.
And where are
Thank you.
these revenues or these funds in the financial reports for TRPA?
They are not.
They're not. Okay. They're not even on the balance sheet?
I don't know. No.
No.
Yes, both of these are funds of that do appear in the financial statements of TRPA. They're both special revenue funds, and I don't have the financial statements handy right now, but I could tell you where they are. But they do appear in the TRPA's financial statements.
Yeah, just not in our general fund. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, feel free to carry on, Mr. Davis.
Okay, very good. Next slide, please. There was one change in accounting principles this past year. TRPA did elect to implement GASB statement number 101. GASB stands for Governmental Accounting Standards Board. Statement 101 was related to compensated absences and a need to record compensated absences on your books. This is a slight change from prior years in that TRPA has always recorded compensated absences on its books, but the standard itself changed it from being you only need to record what is due to an employee at the time they separate from service. That was the old standard. The new standard is now you need to record a liability on the books based upon the more likely than not threshold that employee is going to use their paid time off or sick leave. This standard actually does not need to be implemented until next fiscal year, but early implementation is allowable, and TRPA chose to be an early implementer of this new standard. That did result in a prior period adjustment that's spelled out in your financial statements in reducing net position by $120,000 at the beginning of the year. I do want to add that this more likely than not threshold was not really applicable in your particular case because the paid time off that you have is all paid out when people separate anyway, so the funds are going to be used. Where the prior period adjustment came in is the standard also now requires you to look at all those payroll related items associated with salary. That would be payroll taxes, any contributions to retirement fund programs. Those also have to be included in the calculation of the liability. And that's what that $120,000 really represents. It's those additional funds that were never had to be accounted for before that are included in your liability. Next slide. In preparing the financial statements, management can use estimates, which is perfectly fine. Some of the more significant estimates are determination of what useful lives are of the assets, accruals for goods or services that have been received, but you had not got the invoice by the time the audit rolled around, as well as what we just talked about, the estimated usage of employee vacation or comp time. We look at those estimates and determine whether or not that they have a sound basis, and we found all of them to be reasonable. Next slide. We had no disagreements with management in performing the audit this year. At the end of the audit, we do ask management to provide representations to us in the form of a separate letter that really says that they have responded fully to all of our questions, gave us all the documentation that we asked for. And we did get those representations. To our knowledge, there were no consultations with other accountants as to the application of accounting principles. And we do remain available as a resource to Chad and his team throughout the year, should unusual transactions or things come up that they just want to bounce off of us. We actually encourage that so that when we get to the audit, we run into situations like this where there were no audit adjustments. Next slide. And with that, that's all I have for presentation of the results of the audit. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have regarding audit process.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Davis. To my colleagues, are there any additional questions of the audit? Okay, seeing none.
I
No.
do have a quick one.
Mm.
And it's not about this audit, but it's about our RFP process. And a quick question. I thought GASB required, if you don't change auditors, at least you change managing partners who review the statements. Am I incorrect in that? This is coming back from local government protocols.
I don't actually know off the top. I don't know if Mark
Okay.
knows.
Yeah, I can answer that one. This is another one of those things that's different on the states level. In California, you are absolutely correct. There's no requirement to change audit firms, but there is a requirement that at least every 6 years, the partner on the engagement needs to be transitioned off and a new partner come on. And over the course of the time that we or our predecessor firm had the contract, we've done that. You've had a couple different partners on the engagement. I was the initial partner way back when it was originally awarded to us. When I hit that threshold, we transitioned over to Jennifer Farr. She remained as your partner for a number of years. And then when she timed out, I came back as your partner. So yes, you're absolutely correct. There is a requirement to change partners at least once every 6 years.
I appreciate that. I know we thank Orange County for some challenges they had that was to those changes, but those are important changes for the public to understand that even if the firm doesn't change, additional partners are taking a look at those financial statements. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I heard in the discussion that we're going to be going out for an RFP again this year. Mr. Davis, where are you now in the 6-year rotation?
This is my 5th year. And so in all likelihood, when the RFP does come out, I will probably not be the partner on our proposal, just because it probably wouldn't make sense that I stay on for 1 year and then we transition in the middle of a contract. We would probably start clean with a new partner.
Okay, great, good information. Other questions of the auditor? Nope. Okay, we'll go ahead and open this up to public comment. Are there any public in the room that would like to talk to the board, talk to this committee about the financials audit? Why are you all here?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go ahead and close public comment. I'll bring it back to the committee for additional discussion and or motion.
Well, I don't hear any other discussion, so I'll make a motion to recommend to the governing board the acceptance of our fiscal year 2024 audit.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Gustafson. Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none. We can take a vote in the room now since nobody's online. Is that correct? Or do we need to do a roll call vote?
I think we still need to do a roll call.
Okay, would you please?
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Mr. Aguilar,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
Yeah.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
and Ms. Lane.
Yes.
Madam Chair, motion passes.
Okay, thank you. We'll move right on to our next item, which is discussion and possible recommendation for approval of amendments to the TRPA Rules of Procedure regarding public meeting procedures, which is Article 2, and public records request fee policies, which is Article 15. And I would like to pass this on to Mr. St. Michael to introduce this topic.
Thank you, Chair Lane. Good morning. I'm Graham St. Michel, General Counsel for the agency. And as Chair Lane said, I'm here to lead a discussion on our proposed changes to some rules regarding public meeting procedures and our fee policies for public record requests. So we'll start with public meeting procedures. Next slide, please. So as we all know, TRPA is a bi-state entity. It's created by federal legislation that we refer to as the Bi-State Compact or Compact. We're not an agency of either state. We're not an agency of California or Nevada. So the compact is our law, it's our governing law. And in the context of public meeting laws, we have the compact that brings into our compact the state of California, state of Nevada open meeting laws, the Brown Act and the OML. And I think it's important to just sort of, have that quote of the compact, how it incorporates these two laws into our parameters is that all meetings shall be open to the public to the extent required by the law of the state of California, the state of Nevada, whichever imposes the greater requirement applicable to local governments at the time such meeting is held. There is room to interpret that and what exactly that statement means. Does it mean, one way of looking at it is what meetings are open to the public, what meetings are actually public meetings. Another way to look at it, interpret that statement is that it means all of the procedures that apply to public meetings, like how comments are taken or how notice is given, and all of these other types of procedures that apply under those laws. I think for today, we don't really need to get into that. Suffice to say that the TRPA has a longstanding practice of following the state public meeting laws for guidance. So it is our practice to look at both the Brown Act and the open meeting law on all different topics to see which one do we think is more stringent in a particular area, and to apply that for guidance. And even in the past discussion, we see that's something we do just in general with a lot of the things that we deal with. Even if it didn't say this, we're in the financial realm, we're looking at what does the state of California do and what does Nevada do. That's typical practice. Now, next slide, please. As you remember, probably last summer, we had a discussion where the board encouraged staff to take a look at the Brown Act and the open meeting law, compare that with TRPA's rules of procedures, and try to determine, are there any areas where our rules are not quite, in alignment with the state laws. So we have done that. We've completed that analysis, and that's kind of why we're bringing this back today. Is we have some proposed amendments I do want to, common theme is before we go into this is really that, again, these are all things that we are doing anyways. It's just that our rules are silent. So we think it would be a good idea to include these provisions in our rules to bring them up to alignment and to be consistent with what we're already our practices. Next slide, please. So we'll start with the topic of minutes and recordings. What we're proposing is to define a minimum retention period of board minutes. Once again, sorry to clarify, these are all standards of either the Brown Act or the open meeting law, and we're just proposing to add those to our rules. You can see that this little, I've kind of put some images in here. This can't really see that, but we already have all of the minutes. You can go all the way back to 1978 if you use this drop down here, at least for the governing board, and pull up minutes. There's an excerpt of the minutes from January 2000. The next thing we want to bring in is just describe the required content of minutes. These would be things like what members were present, how everyone voted. These are requirements under the OML, the Nevada Open Meeting Law, and we're just seeking to have our rules sort of track that content. We also want to include defined approval timelines. This is another topic where the OML is a little more specific with respect to the standard is that minutes need to be approved within 45 days or at the next meeting, whichever's later. So we want to add that requirement to our rules. And then we propose including a provision that would allow public recording permission if it's not disruptive. I see we've got a camera here today. So something we would already allow, but just to bring it into our rules. Next slide, please. The next topic would be our agenda item descriptions. So our rules are silent on this topic. Nevada has more specifics in terms of the standard of how agenda items are conveyed and described, and it's a clear and complete standard. So that again is something that we look to Nevada's law to sort of inform and provide us guidance, and we want to adopt that or bring that standard and that language into our rules. Another one is indicating items that are for possible action. So as you can see from the agenda today, I've just indicated there that what we're talking about, the description of the agenda item, and then how we will, describe for possible action on items that the board may act on. And finally, we want to have in our rules a statement that TRPA will identify where agendas are posted. There are requirements that agendas be posted not just online, but at various locations. And our agendas, for the most part, we try to be consistent with making sure this language is in our agendas, and we want to make sure our rules track that practice. Next slide, please. All right, and then this is another kind of, everyone will recognize how we already do this. Our rules are silent in terms of agendas and meeting materials being posted online concurrently with the board distribution. It's our practice to share the board packet and all the materials that you received in advance of a meeting. We do that 1 week in advance. Our rules don't say anything about posting this material online for the public, and so we want to make sure those rules track the state laws. And as you can see, that's just an excerpt from our website where you can pull up the materials. And again, that goes up 1 week before all of our meetings. Next slide. The last comment, or I'm sorry, the last topic that we will propose addressing at this point is our rules don't have a specific rule about public comment and when the board receives public comment. And so once again, the Nevada standard is a little more detailed here. It talks about at what point in time during the meetings that public comment is allowed. That's kind of the second yellow highlight. And we'd like to make sure our rules have that same sort of definition around when public comments will be taken. And then we do think it would be useful to include some discretion to allow reasonable restrictions that are viewpoint neutral. All of this is consistent with First Amendment case law. And then finally, to allow for the board to grant additional accommodations for non-English speakers or translators when translators are there, to have maybe greater allotment of time for those public comments. And that comes from the Brown Act. So those are our proposals with respect to the open meeting law. I pause there. I know there's one more topic to get through, the public records fee, and maybe I'll just do that, just a couple slides, and then turn it over to the board for discussion unless anyone wants to pause.
Are there any questions that you want to ask now?
Yeah,
Mr. Bass?
Madam Chair, I have a question. So just regarding so we can basically, or we do pick and choose from Nevada open meeting law and Brown Act. We look at each individual issue and decide whether open meeting law or the Brown Act is the more restrictive restrictor, and we choose that part of that law to follow. It's not just one or the other.
So what we do is we have, the TRPA has its own rules. And again, that's what I would say. Those are our governing authorities. As I use the word, we look to the state laws for guidance. So if there's a particular topic that, the example is the public comment of when we need to take public comment. We borrow from the Nevada open meeting law because we think that one is a little more specific. I would, and this is where it's a kind of a legal issue. I would say that is not necessarily a hard and fast legal requirement on TRPA. Now, if we adopt it into our rules, it would be. That would be something that we'll follow the Nevada standard. Did you want to say?
Thank you, Julie Reagan here. Thank you, Member Bass. If you look in practice, by and large, the Nevada open meeting law is what we've hewed to, but General Counsel St. Michelle is correct. That's the key takeaway. The compact and the rules of procedure are what govern the proceedings. And for example, public reviews of executives, that's a Nevada open meeting law. It's different in California. We hew to what we believe is the stricter. So it's not necessarily a case by case. We're following our own rules of procedure. On balance, it aligns best with the Nevada open meeting law, I think, in most areas. But I think what our legal team has done very well in this is to look at other aspects of the Brown Act that we can include into the rules of procedure that you're considering changing today.
Mr. Aguilar?
Yeah, the Nevada rules only require public comment at the beginning of the meeting and the end of the meeting, but we do public comment for each item we're gonna cast a vote.
The Nevada gives you an option. It could be at the beginning or at the end. There's always
I think it changed. It's both.
Well,
beginning and the-
yeah, there's always the public interest comment that has to happen once before adjournment. But then you have the option, I believe, of taking public comment at the beginning of the meeting or before the board takes action on each item. I can follow up with you after or we can kind of look into it right now, but we have done this analysis over the past, during the fall, we look closely at this. And I would say the way that our agendas have public comment now, the way that the board already does it, it's very familiar to the board, is we'll have the staff present on a topic, and then before the board takes action, we'll invite public comment like we'll do today. That's consistent with what Nevada. Yeah.
No Nevada meeting I've been in is dealt with.
There's also the option to do it once at the beginning and then once after, but we do think that it makes more sense to give the public an opportunity to comment before the board takes action on every individual item. Yeah.
I'm
And
not
again,
against
it's
public comment anyway. I'm just trying to
Yeah.
understand
yeah.
the basis for the decision making that we have here. That's all.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
No, sorry.
Mr. Rice?
In Douglas County, just to make sure that it's cleaner, we take public comment at the beginning, public comment on every action item, and then public comment at the end of the meeting. So that we cover all the bases. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes not so good.
Yes, and I thank you for helping me out there. That's kind of what I was trying to say. Nevada lets you have that option. And we're proposing, we are proposing to track the Nevada statute. So it would be either or. So we could, the TRPA would have the discretion to go with the once before, once after. We're basically tracking very closely the Nevada language on that particular topic.
And the reason I ask is just because I know at times we've kind of shuffled public comment around, which people that are here are giving up their time to be here. And I want to make sure that we're clear and transparent to them that they can use their time wisely to be able to voice their opinion on decisions we're making.
And
Ms. Gustafson?
I had a question. I completely appreciate having as much flexibility with when public comment. There are some who take repeated advantage and take both at the beginning and the end and use and make the same comments. And what I witnessed for the last 2 years trying to chair this board, we had board members needing to leave, public members that didn't get a chance to express a new comment because somebody had used 10 or 12 public comments during the course of the meeting. Does Nevada open meeting law have any restrictions on that? So if you speak at the beginning or at the end, certainly on every action item, we must take it before we take action, at least in California, but the beginning and the end and at every item becomes one person can dominate and not give everybody an opportunity to speak to us.
Yeah, these, neither the Brown Act nor the open meeting law, the statutes themselves really go into that sort of those types of restrictions. The ability to reasonably restrict public comment really comes from, I think, from case law and some of the guidance from the Attorney General's offices that that interpret the public meeting laws. And like we've done today, even, you know, some of these, it's kind of a case by case basis to answer your question directly. If there's a specific proposal about, you know, we think that there's a need to respond to that type of maybe, you know, not abusive practice or something, but just it's affecting our ability to run an efficient meeting. We can look into that, a specific, you know, idea of how to address that and see if that would, you know, be what we consider a reasonable restriction.
Or even if we look at the order in which we call, so we ensure that new people are able to speak before we call on somebody who's already spoken repeatedly during the meeting with various issues, not on, and again, I'm not speaking about the action items because it's very clear we need to have everybody have their opportunity to address us on those action items. But in the general public comment period, if there's an opportunity, I know that when I served on a state commission under Bagley-Keene, we ended up having to set a limit because of that for a couple of individuals. And then it was a cumulative time for the entire meeting that they could take. So I think it ended up being 15 minutes. They could speak 1 minute on every single item. They could do 3 minutes 5 times. And we actually kept track, but that was a state, you know, Bagley-Keene is different than Brown Act. So I just want the public to know we want to hear everybody's opinion and everybody should have equal opportunity and not be, and try to consider that in the order in which we call on people maybe is the best approach on the general public comment period or periods, depending on what the outcome is there.
I mean, that's definitely something we can look into. I just want to make sure the understanding, the rules that we have now are currently silent. And we're proposing to add some language that would say reasonable restrictions may be placed on public comment to ensure orderly and efficient meetings. Talk about that being viewpoint neutral, which we have to do to comply with the First Amendment. So this is a step towards that from what we have now, which are silent. And I think this would be the first sort of footing to give us more discretion to look into those types of.
Yeah, and it may just be up to the chair to call in a different order, just to make sure that we hear from people that have waited patiently all day to speak on one issue and don't and have to wait a long time for that. Thanks.
Ms. Reagan?
And Madam Chair, thank you, Julie Reagan, TRPA Executive Director. Just for the purpose of moving into the future with this, we will commit, we have a new chair, Ms. Williamson, to caucus with the chair and vice chair and just look at if there are some improvements we can make. And also just to give the public more certainty. I know, Madam Chair, you and I have talked about having the public comment at the end. It's very unpredictable what time our meetings will conclude. And sometimes people want to make that comment, but they have to leave. So there are some improvements. I think that your action today, should you take it, would give us the ability to even make further improvements down the road.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I shared with you when we had this conversation that El Dorado County takes public comment at 1 o'clock on board days. So it's very certain for the public, if they want to come down, they can work their lunch hour around it, or they know that no matter what other business is going on, we're going to stop at 1 o'clock to take public comments on items not on the agenda. So I think that's been very efficient. It's worked well.
That's a
in
great
El Dorado
idea.
County.
And that, I know with Placer, we do public comment at the beginning of the meeting, but if there's huge issue and it is extending too long, we reserve the right to open it up for a certain amount at the beginning, just on general public comment. And then again, at the end, we'll take it up. But I like the idea. That's a good suggestion to set a time certain for those who just want to talk to us about an item not on our agenda.
Right. And I think these are all, I agree. These are things I think that you may start with that discretion in the rule and then leave the rules open to some ability to manipulate them, or not, sorry, that's probably not a good word, but to apply them in a manner that is, makes sense for everything. If you had that in the rule, it might hamstring the board a little bit. So yeah.
Do you want to go ahead and talk about the fee policy for, oh, sorry, Mr.
Nevada statute is an or, it's beginning of the meeting, end of the meeting, or at each agenda item. So.
Yeah. Hopefully that's what I said. If I confused that, I apologize. Okay, so the fee policies.
Yes, please.
All right, so next slide, please. This is with respect to public records requests. As a public agency, we have public records. The rules, our rules currently incorporate the policies of the Freedom of Information Act, which is the federal public records request law. And I wanted to point out that under what we're talking about today is really the ability of the agency to recover staff, the cost of staff time spent responding to public records requests. And under the Freedom of Information Act and the Nevada revised statutes, agencies can recover the time that staff spends answering requests. Under the California Public Records Act, that the only recovery that those agencies can have is with respect to cost of duplication. So the amount, like if you're responding with making copies, you can charge for the cost of the paper. We don't really respond to records requests anymore in hard copy form. Most of it's electronic. So that's really just not something that happens under California law. TRPA's rules, we do track the FOIA and the Nevada revised statutes and allow for cost recovery of the staff time. Next slide, please. What we're proposing is just to alleviate that fee burden to some extent. I want to point to the image on the right, which includes our hourly rates for responding to public records requests. And you see if our paralegal is gathering records, that's often the staff person that does this work, and it's $60 an hour. And more time for attorney review. There's often attorney review needed to assess confidentiality and privilege rules. So it can get expensive, and we've heard from the public that this is a burden on many of the members of the public to get at what are otherwise public records. So we've brought a proposal to make the first hour free, essentially. And then if your request is going to take 1 to 4 hours, we would reduce these rates by 50%. And if a request is going to take longer than 4 hours because you've submitted a pretty intensive, involved request, we will continue to apply the full rate. And we've also included a small rule about just to make sure that people aren't working their way around a rule like this, the intent of the rule, by submitting numerous small requests within a 60-day period. So that's the proposal with the fee policy for public records.
Thank you. Are there questions on the fee policy? Mr. Bass?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. My question's more goes back to trying to get my mind around, I see that we're not an autonomous agency to any of either two states unless it's explicitly stated in the compact. It seems that this is, it's pointing back to open meeting law or the Brown Act. So we're not exempt to one or the other. We have to follow one of the two. We can't go to the Freedom of Information Act. Because it's explicit in the compact.
To clarify, the public records is completely outside of the Brown Act and open meeting law. Public records aren't addressed in those two. It's kind of a different topic.
Okay.
We have our own public records policy, basically, that lives in our rules of procedure. And I believe that the compact says something, I don't have it right in front of me, but I think it says something similar to what any record that's a public record under California or Nevada law is a public record for TRPA. So the point is we can't deny access. We can't say this is an agency that doesn't have to follow open records laws.
Yeah, and I guess where my confusion comes in is how, if we have to follow the kind of making it as a public record, how do we not have to follow the actual availability or the requirements that, for instance, California has put forward that say we can't charge for staff time. And I know that's how it is in the city and for our agencies, but I don't know. I'm just kind of trying to wrap my mind around what is governing us and if we are in violation if we're not following California law. Because the way I see it, it's like we've always picked which one is stricter or which one is,
this is a different topic. And the compact doesn't use that language around it's just, and that's why it's important, I think, legally to take a close look at what the compact language is in terms of what's the scope of the incorporation of the state law. It's not incorporating the entire bodies of both laws. We'd kind of have this Frankenstein situation if that was the case for all of these. It's mainly just a reference to say that the agency TRPA has to follow or has to provide access to public records, but it doesn't bring in all of the every rule or regulation related to either state's public records laws.
I recall when Miss Blankenship was elected as the city clerk, she went through a big process of scanning a lot of documents. And we really upped our website's ability for the public to search. And I've gone on to TRPA's website and tried to find documents, and it's not great. Is there an effort or is there a thought about improving our search engine and making more documents available online that the public can access?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Julie Reagan here. We have invested a lot in our search function. So flag whatever you can't find.
Okay.
Because like our general counsel said, we have minutes going back into the 70s. We have a lot of historical documents. We have laketahoeinfo.org. We have a parcel tracker. I think we have 25,000 individual parcels permit history digitized. So I wanted to thank you for raising it because there is a lot of information that people can garner information from on our website. And then linking to other sources, EIP projects. If people want to know what funds are being expended in the environmental improvement program, there's just a treasure trove of data. One of the things that we're working on, which will continue, is to make that more intuitive to the user. So it's very possible that there's information there that maybe isn't obvious. So we can take some specific ideas around that and work on it. But in general, a lot of the requests that we get, and we went back and looked over the last 3 years, I think we've had something like 50 or 60 requests, and I think we've charged for a minimal amount, maybe a dozen in that department. And the most amount of money we've collected in any one year is around $1,000. So this is not a lot of money
Yeah.
that's coming to the agency. Most of the requests that we get, we're able to point them to the website, the parcel tracker, and do that verbally on the phone. Catherine Houston does a great job working with the public. Our public information staff and communication staff is constantly sending people links to, our BMP website. There's a lot of other websites beyond trpa.gov that has information. So, happy to walk through more of that, but we can always do better. It's a very data heavy, content heavy site. And for example, realtors are very interested in parcel information. We've put additional information on the homepage so that's really obvious that you don't have to click 3 times to get to the permit parcel tracker. And so we just made that adjustment, within the last year. So more
Excellent.
work to do, but there's a lot online that maybe isn't obvious.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions of my colleagues on this?
Yes, Madam Chair. So I would just be curious. I know you said we collect about $1,000. Do we have any idea of how many people may put public records request in and didn't move forward because the cost was prohibitive for them to decide to move forward?
I think our staff Chad might know, a couple maybe last year.
Yeah, I don't have the exact data, but I do know from talking with Catherine, right? In most cases, if it's quick, we just do it, right? I'm not aware of anything that came back significant where somebody said we can't do it. So
I'm not talking on the staff side of not being able to do it. I'm talking on the public side of somebody requesting something and being told, sorry, it's going to be $1,200 in staff time. So they just stop their request because, and that's what I've actually heard from the public is there have been people that have tried to get information and they've come back to say, oh, that's going to cost this amount of money. Well, I don't have that amount of money. So
they just stop.
They stop, whether they're a journalist from the press or whether there's public. And I think that's the point of not California saying you can't charge for this because they want to have full open transparency. So I'm just curious if we have any idea of how many people just kind of stop their record request due to financial implications.
I've had a couple of people reach out to me who have made records requests and the cost was too high for them to do it. And they're private citizens who don't have the resources to make those requests. So.
Yeah. And I would say there are a handful of people, I think, who get the estimate of the time and then decide not to go. I mean, we're responding directly to probably the same types of comments that you've heard. I think, so I worked in California agencies for about 10 years. And there are, that can significantly burden even a large agency with a large staff. That said, something like this, where there's a proposal for reduced cost, especially a lot of these requests are very, very small, an hour, a lot of times probably what we can get through many of these requests. And, do we need to charge that person $60, $70, $100 for an hour of time? Does it really make that big of a difference? That's what we're, why what this proposal responds to. The idea of just waiving fees altogether and having no fees, not what we're proposing here today. I think that is, again, from my experience being in agencies, not everybody, I hate to say it, is operating in good faith sometimes with public records requests. That's just the reality. And in some respect, if a private person is going to, eat up that much staff time, we, consistent with FOIA and the Nevada, we think that it's appropriate to charge for that, especially for a small agency like us.
And Madam Chair, if I can just also add some context, when the board wrestled with this many, many years ago, there were private companies that were doing due diligence and competitive market research, and they were burdening staff with time to pull records. And that was also part of the calculus in bringing this in. And there were, some bad actors. So I think what we are proposing is a show of good faith that we're trying to harmonize, as we always do. It's very complicated to harmonize federal and 2 states laws and the spirit and intent of those laws, but be committed to our great public service that we offer with our staff in going out in the community. If we're out at a farmer's market or a community meeting, and people have requests, we're running that down constantly. I mean, that's just our job, but this is just formalizing, we think for the benefit of the taxpayers who fund the agency, we think it's fair, and to give some consideration for a discount so that it's not a burden for those. Sometimes when Catherine may want to weigh in on this because she does all the work on this, she does a great job of like trying to work through specifics so that it's not a burden, 50-hour project. But once talking through with that member of the public, there may be certain things that can narrow the search. I mean, in practice, that's how we try to provide that good service.
Is there an opportunity, since people have reached out to both of you, that we understand the content of what these folks have asked for? Because I see so much opportunity on the website that I'm not sure exactly what they're asking for that they can't see for themselves, but I want to be sensitive that there's some sort of an appeal process. To your point, right? If somebody's just wasting our time, then I think, and the public's time, we have the duty to the rest of the public to streamline that. But if somebody truly has a legitimate concern and it's going to cost some money, can they appeal that to the executive officer? Can they appeal that, to a committee of the board? I'm open to that because I want to consider those cases and make sure that we're doing the right thing for the public.
Yeah, I think the way that would play out is if we got to that situation where there was really something and we said, hey, your request can take 12 hours. It's going to take this much time. And they said, I'm not paying. We would say, hey, well, then we're going to deny the request consistent with the rules. And then that would come to the board through an
But if we
appeal.
wrote into our rules, there was an appeal process of that for justification, then I know that would again take time for us to process an appeal of that, but it would give that opportunity and assurance to the board that we weren't withholding, and to the rest
Yeah.
of the public, we're not withholding preparing that record. It's
Right.
just, yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is I think any action that staff takes can be appealed to the board already.
Okay.
So I think that's just our practice. I mean, it's if staff take action and deny something the public's requesting, they always have the right to file an appeal. That
How do they know they have that right?
we would put it in whatever
In the
letter.
denial
Yeah,
letter?
that's what we
Okay,
do.
good. Yeah,
Okay.
because I'm seeing some head shaking here on the committee. That's something we feel would be helpful.
Mhm.
We can make sure that's clear in the communication.
Great. Okay, are there any other
Just as a
comments?
person who's probably in the one office in state government that gets the most public records requests because of the election, I understand sometimes there are bad actors out there, but there are also too individuals who just want to know information. And the way to get that information is to have a primary source to be either justify their thinking or to also become more educated about the decision process.
Appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, as a lawyer in government, we do a lot of public records work, and a lot of it is just directing people to where the information is. We do a lot of time, as Julie said, to mention with Catherine, of trying to help people focus their request and get what they're really looking for. So there's a lot of times where they're asking for records, but what they're really asking for is they have questions. And we don't pigeonhole them into, well, you need to ask, we're going to give you records. We will look to answer their questions. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Good conversation on this topic. Is there any other discussion before we open it up to the public? Mr. Bass? We'll come back for discussion. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, we'll go ahead then and open this up to the public. Are there any members in the audience that would like to address the committee on public input or our fee policy? Okay, seeing none, we'll look online.
Madam Chair, we have 3 hands raised online.
Okay, please.
The first hand up is Doug Flaherty. Doug, please unmute to make your comment.
Thank you, members of the committee. Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. The reason that public records requests are made oftentimes is because the TRPA search engine in your website is one of the worst I have ever seen. I use AI 50 times a day. When I want to find out something about the TRPA, I go to AI. It is totally substandard, and it's basically put in place to keep the public from understanding information that they're trying to receive. That needs to be fixed. It's awful. You're so behind the times. Secondly, bad actor is a subjective comment. That's arrogant. It's egregious. Shame on all of you. Maybe there are going to be a few people that make requests, just make requests, but that is arrogant. People have a right to get their information they're asking for. Further, staff time should not be included in this fee schedule. And you need to drop the comment that fees may be aggregate for multiple requests within 60 days. That's punitive. You guys are highly controversial. Most people that ask for public records requests that I know are asking for definitive information. Don't punish people because you guys bring up 3, 4, 5, 6 controversial items a meeting, and then punish somebody because they make multiple requests. You are so behind the times. Lastly, attorney fees, absolutely not. People have a right to make these requests. You shouldn't tag on attorney's fees while they diddle and dawdle in front of their computer to decide whether or not there's some sort of a reason, which should be construed liberally, by the way, that the public should not receive the request. I really think you guys need to go back to the drawing board on this and bring it back. It's unfair. As far as saying, well, maybe people make requests and when they get the bill, they decide not to. No, actually, when they see your fee schedule, they decide not to because it's too steep. This is the type of thing that make people like me fight harder against the subversion of people trying to make a decent public records request or make a difference. Atrocious. Thank you.
Thank you for your input, Mr. Flaherty.
The next hand raised is Ann Nichols. Ann, please unmute to make your comment.
Yeah, Ann Nichols, North Tahoe Preservation Alliance. I'm a perfect example of this problem. I made a request, the stewardship group that you guys created. There's no one in charge. There's no redress. Amy Berry's in charge of the money. We don't know. So I went to TRPA and I said, where's the MOU? Where's the agreement with the stewardship? I went to TRPA about, what I want to see you spend 4 million now this year. It's 10 million on contracts in the audit. Where's the detail on that? Who are you paying all this money to? It's a third of the budget. And it was responded to me that it would cost me $2,000. And luckily, Graham is so gracious that he helped me through this. But any normal entity would be terrified about all this. So I got the information because Graham was gracious. But if it was just by the book and by what you're proposing here, and these are legitimate questions and that are obscure and, you're creating all this difficulty and complexity. So thank you. Don't do this.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Next.
The last hand raised is Alan Miller. Alan, please unmute to make your comment. Alan, I can see your microphone is unmuted, but it doesn't seem to be picking up any audio. Alan, if you can update your audio settings so that your microphone can pick you up.
While Mr. Miller is working on that, I would like to make an exception and go back to public comment in the room. Ms. Waller was in the hallway when we called on members of the public, and she'd like to address the committee, and then we'll try to go back to Mr. Miller. Ms. Waller.
Good morning, Ellie Waller. Thank you. The parking lot's very full, and I apologize for not being here at the time. I too would like to thank Ms. Houston for assisting me with my requests, my most recent and not too many. I'll make a joke. My husband says I need to go get a job because the amount of paper I print. And again, I'm recently, my requests for public information have been quite short, and it would take 2 hours. I frankly am retired on fixed income, and we're used to another process from 15 years ago. And I'm not saying that staff is not doing their job, but the public also spends a lot of volunteer time trying to research things, being factual when we come before you as a committee and a full board. And yes, the presentation today is a little confusing, not sure what direction we're trying to take. And maybe this needs to come back. It's not quite ready for prime time. I do agree with a lot of the previous speakers. It's getting more and more difficult for the public to obtain information. I do a lot of research on the TRPA website. I'm a lot more familiar than most. Trying to assist other people, but I'm going to start sending them to staff too. I don't want to waste staff time here, but again, I kindly help other people, but I'm kind of getting a little overwhelmed with assisting people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Waller. We'll try Mr. Miller one more time.
All right, Mr. Miller, if you can unmute your microphone. Again, Mr. Miller, I think it's your audio settings to make sure that you have the correct microphone selected.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Miller. We're going to go ahead and close public comment. You're more than welcome to submit your comments in writing, and those will get distributed to the committee and to the board. So we're going to go ahead and close public comment on this item, and I'd like to bring it back to the committee for further discussion or a motion. Ms. Gustafson? No?
Mr. Bass said he had more.
Mr. Bass?
Yeah, so, I originally brought this up, and I think that for me, when I came into public office, I think that, public record requests are the paramount of kind of how we operate as public agencies. I think it's really the freedom of the press, the ability for us to, be in full transparency. And I do think that when somebody, as Ms. Nichols said, you get charged $2,000, obviously, nobody's going to spend $2,000 on something they're already doing essentially for volunteer work. We as a city have to, by California law, comply with, we can charge 10 cents a copy, and that's it. And we have a fire department, a police department, public works, building and planning, our full city administrative staff, us as public officials, all complying with those record requests, which can be daunting, especially for things like our, body cameras and on and on and on. And we're able to do that as a city. It kind of baffles me to how TRPA, and we really do that through our elected city clerk. Yeah, there's, staff time from when I get a request, if I'm a public official. If it's the police department, there's staff time in the police department that Sue, or Ms. Blankenship requests from us. But we're doing that. And I think that when we look at TRPA, we can clearly know that we have some public trust issues and some things that that we need to try to work on. And when I looked at that, it seems that this is one of the main things. And I in no way am saying that TRPA is operating in a bad way, but I think that it helps when you know that that's the way the agency operates, it makes you operate differently. And I think it's paramount to what a public agency is. And again, why I question how TRPA can't do it when a city with 6 or 7 departments is doing it constantly. It baffles me a little bit. And I do think that it would improve our public trust to operate in the same way as our cities and counties do in California. I don't see this keeping it restrictive and with financial implications to the public. I don't think it helps our public trust. I think it continues to hurt it. So, understanding that it does add a layer of, more to do. But to me, it's like we should look at how the city clerks operate, how the county clerks operate, how are they being able to do it? Let's build that into the TRPA to help the public trust.
One of the ideas that I was thinking of as we had this conversation was on the fees, on the actual fee schedule. If we added some language at the bottom of the fee schedule that says, these fees can be appealed, or give some kind of option out. I don't know. You're kind of proposing that we only charge for copy fees. Are you saying we shouldn't charge for any of the labor?
I mean, your 2 counties and us don't charge for any of it. And I mean, I'm talking on record requests that are incredibly daunting. I mean, we get requests sometimes every text message for, body camera stuff for the police department. I mean, so how the TRPA doesn't operate like that to me has always been a little bit. And I think that sometimes we're viewed of this ivory tower of government. And one of my goals is to the TRPA should be really publicly trusted and loved because we're protecting what we all love. And how can we get this agency back to that? And I know that it's such a pendulum swing from one side to the next, and that's a constant. But what can we do to try to find the balance? And to me, I think this is paramount to finding that balance.
Madam Chair, if I could,
Yeah.
first off, I think the proposal is a reduction by giving those discounts from what we're currently charging. I realize it doesn't go far enough to express, but I don't know that this is ready for our recommendation today, given the discussion. And given we have people waiting for a next item, I'm wondering if we should table this and bring it back for further discussion, and maybe each committee member give examples to you of ideas. Because I think Ms. Aldine even jumped in here and whispered, have a tutorial on how to use the website, that assists the public in doing that. What I'm concerned about is really the mill houses. And I think we in city and county government realize that there's mill houses out there that send out public records requests and farm us for information. Those are the things we're trying to prevent, not good citizens in our community trying to get research on items.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to be used by those, farming opportunities that are out there. But we want to make sure we're responsive, I think. I think we all agree with that, Cody. So.
Yeah, thank you for making those clarifying statements. That was important. Ms. Reagan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Julie Reagan here. We're happy to take this back and to take your ideas. And I appreciate the discussion. And I want to echo Member Bass's comments. We are doing our very best to be transparent, but we actually have been hacked by bots in Tajikistan. We are a magnet for, and what I meant by bad actors were operations like that. And so that was really a consideration when this rule came into effect. We're trying to be responsive to the public requests, but 2 of the 3 statutes, the federal guidelines, the Nevada guidelines, allow for charging state times. California does not. So our proposal was to harmonize. There's more work to do, and we're happy to revisit it and include the discussion into the mix of some ideas that we could bring back to you.
Okay, great. So just a clarification with the committee, we have 2 items before us. We have recommendations regarding TRPA's open meeting rules, and then we have the public records policy. Would you like to see both of those returned, or
I
are we
think we
prepared
can
to
take
move forward
action.
on the first one?
I personally can take action on the first one. I was
Okay.
just proposing the second one seemed to, yeah.
Okay, then let's work on a motion.
A motion to recommend approval of the required findings is described in attachment A to the staff report entitled Recommended Amendments to TRPA's Open Meeting Rules, including a finding of no significant effect for adoption of the proposed amendments to Article 2 of the TRPA Rules of Procedure.
Thank you. So there's a motion. Is there any further discussion on the open meeting rules? Okay, seeing none, may we please do a roll call vote?
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Mr. Bass?
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Mr. Aguilera,
Yes.
Ms. Lane.
Yes,
Madam Chair, motion passes.
thank you. And then I'm hearing, do we want a formal motion to bring back the public records policy? And if so, within a certain number of days or months, or how do you want to do that?
I'm looking at staff and they're looking.
At us.
Mr. Bass, did you have a suggestion? If you want to,
As far as timeline, I don't have a suggestion. I think that I would put that back to staff and their capacity and what they can bring it, in a reasonable time that they can bring it back to us.
That sounds fine. Thank you.
Is that a form of a motion? Okay. Thank you. Okay, there's a motion before us to bring this matter back in a timely fashion, according to when staff can. Is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Ms. Gustafson,
yes.
Mr. Bass? Mr. Aguilera,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Ms. Lane.
Yes,
That motion passes.
okay. I want to move quickly through the rest of this so we can seat the governing board and start our governing meeting. So with regards to that, is there a quarterly treasurer's report?
There is. Yeah.
Okay,
Shall we go?
let's go.
Okay, quickly, just a quick update on a quarterly basis. We'd like to, sorry.
I'm sorry about that. We didn't capture the second motion up on
The second.
the second motion for the rules of procedure.
Oh, guys,
That's
I
okay.
was thinking that was, I
Thank you,
didn't read
Tracy.
it. So
Yep,
I'm happy to make a motion to recommend adoption of resolution 2025 blank to amend Article 2 Rules of Procedure as shown in attachment B to the staff report entitled Recommended Amendments to TRPA's Open Meeting Rules.
thank you. That was a two-part. The first one was no significant effect.
Yep.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Any further discussion? Okay, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Aguilera,
Yes.
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Ms. Lane.
Yes,
Madam
and
Chair, the
thank
motion
you,
passes.
staff, for catching that. We'll go back to Mr. Cox in the quarterly financial report, please.
Great, thanks. So quarterly, we just want to give you a quick update from a treasurer's report perspective on our investments. We've got a balance of 39.6. This is up a couple $1 million versus last quarter. Just a high level here, there have been no security changes. We continue to be conservative in the way we invest. The majority of our funds are in the two state pools. The LAIF and LGIP accounts represent 70% of where that is. That's similar to history. If you have questions on the market, I'm happy to share. I was going to give you a little update on some of what's been going on at the Fed, but the bottom line is interest rates are dropping a bit. Our maturities have continued to remain roughly 2 years on the principal group there, and overall, we continue to follow the policy that you guys adopted back a couple months ago. So no concerns from a policy perspective, no concerns from a security ratings perspective, and we continue to remain conservative in the way we invest TRPA funds, and there hasn't been much change versus the last quarter. So with that, I'll leave it open for questions.
Are there any questions of Mr. Cox? Okay, seeing none, this is an information only item, and so we ask that if the public has comments on this particular item, that you share those with us at the conclusion of the meeting when we take public interest comments. So we'll go ahead and move on to upcoming topics. Mr. Cox?
Yeah, just real quick, from upcoming topics, February, we're going to go through the AIS fee update. So that's, important to keep on on the horizon. And then obviously we have the budget stuff coming up. So the team's starting to kick that process off in advance of our April meeting. We'll bring a draft to you in May, and then similar to last year, I'll look to do a final and approve, get an approved budget in June for fiscal year 26. That's it.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Okay. All right, we'll go to committee member comments. Are there any committee members that would like to make comments at this time? Nope. Okay, seeing none, we'll go to our public interest comments. This is our final matter of business. Any member of the public wishing to address Operations and Governance Committee may do so at this time on items on or not on our agenda. Are there any members of the public that wish to address the committee on any topic? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to our online participants.
Madam Chair, we have 2 hands raised. The first hand up was Ann Nichols. Ann, please unmute to make your comment.
I think it's appropriate to say this. Ann Nichols, North Tahoe Preservation Alliance. From the public's perspective, there's several financial details that remain unclear in the reports for the budget and the audit. For example, it's difficult to find detailed expenses related to code enforcement or compliance reviews, which of course are super important to the public. While the agency operates on a $30 million budget, $3 million of which is allocated to administrative compensation, there is no detailed breakdown of the $11.5 million spent on contracts, which is a huge percentage of the budget. There should be a detail. There's unclear headings. TRPA's financial reporting uses headings that are not intuitive to the public. For instance, it is not immediately clear whether R&A refers to repairs and maintenance or something else entirely. Similarly, A&O should mean administrative operations and expensive, but this is not explicitly stated. Improved transparency in financial headings and detailed cost center reporting would help build public trust and understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols.
And the last hand up is Alan Miller. Alan, please unmute to make your comment.
Alan Miller, South Lake Tahoe Civil Engineer. Can you hear me?
We can now.
Apologize for the earlier microphone issue. I'm
That's okay.
speaking about the changes to the rules that were discussed in item 3. And I just, you have my written comments for the record. They're posted online. I didn't see that there was any acknowledgement or discussion of the comments I provided, so that's just a shine on. I do agree with the comments made by the prior speakers. I think TRPA has a really lousy database, but the main thing is I don't think TRPA has the legal issues straightened out here. I think putting the public comment at the end of the meeting is absolutely wrong. I don't think it's in accordance with the most stringent requirement, nor is there a justification, in my view, to put it only at the end of the meeting. It's just disrespectful to the public. It's disdainful. It's chilling to public input. And that's why TRPA did that in the first place. When people were coming forward and voicing their concerns about TRPA approving cell towers all over the basin, including their faux pine plastic macro towers, TRPA decided they'd heard enough of that. And the way to chill public input was to put it all at the end. Make people wait. Make people have no time certain to speak. And that was disrespectful to the public, legally improper. And I think if you persist in that, we're going to end up in litigation again. It's just ridiculous. And, you know, I also don't agree that there's discretion to charge fees. Clearly, under the compact, I can walk into your office and request any public records I want, and you need to provide free, 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 free. So you're using the FOIA Act to try to confuse things, to try to interject things, and you don't follow the FOIA Act. You only pick and choose. It's called cherry picking. This is all in my comments. And again, there was no discussion of them. So I guess we'll just see what happens. I don't think it's right. I don't think TRPA is treating the public as it deserves. I don't think it's following the law. And if I have to litigate it to get to the bottom of that, I'm not opposed to that. It's very, very important. And you guys are committing felonies by doing so. You put it at the end, that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Okay, we'll go ahead and close public comment, and I would be looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. We stand adjourned at 10:18.